Hi. Today I'm going to talk about the IDEATE method. And this is a method that was developed by Greg Poole and Dan Cohen, along with Heidi Neck in a recent book called The IDEATE Method. Now, IDEATE is an acronym. It stands for Identify, Discover, Enhance, Anticipate, Target, and Evaluate. What the IDEATE method tries to do and tries to give entrepreneurs is a method and kind of a pathway to brainstorm and identify and develop and test and then build new ideas into new opportunities. So it starts with the problem. It always starts with the problem. If it doesn't start with the problem, you might stop and see if you're on the wrong track. So identify is our I in IDEATE. Identify means that we need to identify a real problem. If people are going to fork over their hard-earned money, most of the time at least, that product will be solving a real problem for them. Before you jump in and say, oh, I've identified a problem, got it, you want to make sure that that problem isn't actually a symptom of a deeper problem. So how do you know? How can you determine whether it's a symptom or a problem? One way to start thinking about the root cause of the problem is, first of all, ask why. Why is this a problem? Well, why is that a problem? Etc., etc. Secondly, you can look and see, how do people try to solve the problem now? If you look at the way the solutions that people are trying to implement, then it can give you an idea of what the actual problem is. D is for discover. This means that we are looking to open our minds, open our horizons, expand our horizons, and look for ideas in problem-rich environments. Now, one way to find problems or starting to identify opportunities, problems that might pose new opportunities, is looking for change. Because on some level, there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there, and while entrepreneurs have absolutely not solved every problem, if a problem exists and it's pretty obvious and it's not being solved, you have to ask why. You have to ask why it's not being solved. So maybe it's just not a viable market thing. Maybe someone hasn't really thought about it. Maybe the right person hasn't thought about it. But more often, you're going to find new opportunities where change is occurring. So this can be social change, this can be demographic change, political change, certainly technological change can introduce all sorts of new opportunities. Industry changes, maybe a giant global pandemic that changes our lives. Whatever it is, new needs are often created by change. And what you can do is look at how these changes are changing the landscape for people, for their problems, for their lives, maybe even for their ability to solve their problems. There are so many opportunities in up-and-coming economies, both in the US and outside the US, where people are starting to pull themselves out of poverty. They're starting to have opportunities, have a more stable income source, and then they're able now to solve more of their problems through markets, through buying things for themselves and their lives. And this is where there might be new opportunities to solve, to help tailor products or bring products to market in markets that have previously been underserved, either because, there's lots of reasons why markets can be underserved, but that's another area to look for problems that you can turn into opportunities. One other thing is that if you look for trends, you look for change, sometimes you can see how changes in one area can build and drive changes in another area. And that's where having this kind of broad view, taking the bird's eye view of the world and always noticing things in different areas can really help generate that creativity that drives you to come up with ideas that are impactful and are things that maybe people haven't thought of. Because if everyone's focused on their one area of expertise, they can miss things. If you are learning and digging deep into one area, and then you have your hobbies in another area, have a different interests, different areas of expertise. Oftentimes, it's this what we call analogous thinking, that you can take an idea from one area, transfer it to the other area, and that's where something new happens. One thing is, along with that idea of range, we talk about the book by David Epstein called Range, and it is a phenomenal book for entrepreneurs. And it's a phenomenal book if you're a person who has diverse interests and tends to hop around and be interested in all sorts of different things. Our society doesn't always think that that's a good thing. But when it comes to solving wicked problems, really complex, hairy, difficult problems, sometimes having that range can be such a huge strength. The other thing that you can do to discover is to change your perspective, broaden your perspective. Sometimes traveling is a great way to do this. And then not just traveling where you're going to go to Cancun and stay at a resort where you're going to be with people who are like you. Get out there and figure out what it's like to live a different life. Figure out what other people's experiences have been. Talk to people. Ask them what their problems are. Be interested when they say, oh man, I'm having this thing, instead of going, oh yeah, that must be rough. Just show some interest. And first of all, it'll make them feel better, because having someone to listen and validate their problems really feels good as a human. But it also will help you understand more about the world, understand more problems beyond your own sphere. So talk to people, be interested in people, be interested in problems, travel, watch documentaries, whatever it is, broaden your perspective. And then finally, you want to go deeper. You can discover by going deep into a certain area. And I know I talked about range and how it's good to have expertise in a wide array of areas, but sometimes you can identify opportunities and identify problems because you have a strong expertise and you understand an area. For Dear Tomorrow, for example, the nonprofit that I founded, it was the depth of knowledge in climate change, both in the problem space of the science and the policy and the economics, and then also the communication, like always following what people are thinking and what trends and what do they support, and then pairing that with a deep understanding of behavioral science. That is how I came up with a new idea that was a solution to the problem of climate change feeling what we call psychologically distant. Next up is enhance. Now, you may just come up with the idea that is just the next $1 million idea fully formed from your head, but that's not that likely. What's more likely is you'll come up with the seed of an idea that can then be grown into something that is really impactful. So what you want to do is take the ideas you have and try to expand them. And this is where that yes and improvisational exercise can help. So talk to people about your ideas, get lots of feedback, and try to see how many of those yes and conversations you can have. The other way to expand your idea, enhance your idea, is to think about how it might work in a different context. So is your solution, are you finding the right context or maybe even the right market, the right area for your solution, or can you shift it to a different area? Some of the best applications, classic is the Slinky. In fact, there's lots of examples from NASA where there's the application which it's designed for. I guess the Slinky was not that useful for astronauts, seemed space-like. But for kids, it was great. And turns out parents are willing to pay a lot of money to keep their kids entertained and themselves sane, because that is a problem worth solving. Anticipate. This kind of goes along with that discover, where you're looking at trends, but now you don't just want to look at how things are right now or what is new, what's coming onto the scene. You want to look at where that's going in the future. And you don't have a crystal ball, it's fine. You don't have to predict the future. In fact, sometimes we can say entrepreneurs help create the future. However, you do want to look at, if you see a trend, if you see a change happening, where is that heading? Where is that going to go? And what needs are going to arise? And the other key thing is, what solutions may soon be possible that aren't really possible right now? Are there technological limitations now that are becoming less of a limitation? Like facial recognition, image recognition. This is something that is surprisingly new. We weren't able to do this just a few, I don't know how many years ago, at least in widespread applications. So now there's all sorts of new uses for image recognition that's not even being used. Like, for example, space. I used to work at the Earth Lab at the University of Colorado, and we focused on the fact that there's so much data, there's so many photos and sensing and infrared and all sorts of data that was coming in about the Earth from space, from satellites mainly, and there's not the, there's also, on the other hand, there's new technologies and machine learning and data science and deep learning image recognition. Those are developing. You got the data's huge, getting up there. Now, putting those two things together provides so much opportunity for new insights, new ideas, new solutions, huge opportunities. Another way to anticipate is to think about how the current trends might be moving into new areas, new regions, new populations. Some of it's going to be inevitable, and it's probably, if there's existing companies that are, expanding and growing their business, that probably isn't the best place to try to compete. But what you might see is you might be able to anticipate new needs, new niches where you can come in and solve problems that arise as these trends expand. The other big one in terms of anticipating future changes, climate change. Hello. Talk about some really clear problems. We're going to have lots of problems. But we're also going to have lots of opportunities. That's a glass half full, if I've ever seen one. But if you look at the implications of climate change, there's a lot of opportunities to solve new problems that we know are coming. So get on top of it now. Adaptation is immensely full of opportunities for entrepreneurs who are going to try to solve real pressing problems moving forward. T is for target. This is where you need to identify your target market. You can't be vague about this. You can't just say, oh, we're going to have some customers or students or people, moms, whatever it is. You need to figure out who exactly really has the need and the problem that your idea, that your product or service will solve. And you need to figure out who are the early adopters. It might be possible to expand, if you're not going to go niche, there are some products that stay niche. But if you envision a wider expanse of users for your product, that's fine. But you do have to identify your early adopters, and you want to target your focus towards them. Because the thing is, without focusing on a target market, without really getting to know that person and what they like, what they don't like, what are their stuck points, what makes them want to jump onto a new product or service. If you don't know them, and if you don't envision and figure out what it is and go out and talk to them and ask them if they are interested in your solution and try to sell them your solution, if you don't have that target market, you're not going to really get off the ground, because you have to figure out how to test your concept and how to tailor your solution and make sure it is exactly what that target really needs. E, we're on the last E. E is evaluate. Now, evaluate means that we can't just sit back and say, oh, look, I've got my idea, I've got my problem, I got my solution, I got my target market. We are home free. You might not be home free because sometimes you can have all those pieces, but your idea, your solution to a problem still might not be viable. Now, that could be because your solution doesn't really solve the problem. That's one big issue. The other thing is that your target market might not be big enough to turn your idea into a viable business. It has to be viable. You have to be able to make money to survive. If you're a nonprofit, you have to know the funding mechanisms and the funding landscape. It is hard to get money as a nonprofit. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it is extremely difficult to raise money, especially if you're new. Foundations are very risk averse. They don't want to give money to every new person who has a new idea. Trust me, I've asked them. It takes years before you're able to really find those funds. So you really have to figure out, how are you going to drive this idea forward? What resources do you have at hand? Do you have that rich uncle who wants to fund your new idea? Well, that's nice. That's helpful. It's extremely helpful, actually. It's part of why there's some inequality that's inherent in entrepreneurship. It's a lot easier to convince your rich uncle that you have a great idea. But you want to figure out, is your target market big enough? Can you charge enough to cover the cost that it's going to take to make your product happen? That can be a problem too. Do you and your co-founders, hopefully, have the skills that you need to take the idea forward? I have all sorts of ideas. Some of them I just don't have the skills or the time to implement them. That's a really important thing. And sometimes it might be that you pass the idea on to someone else. Sometimes you bring on co-founders and you bring on other staff potentially that can help bring those skills in. But remember, if there's skills that you need, you probably need money to bring those skills on board. So maybe you can do it through a co-founder who sees your vision and believes in your vision and is willing to take on those risks along with you, but you have to be able to give them a stake in the outcome, a stake in the company, whatever. Some people will work for free if they can afford to for a while, but you're going to have to share, basically. That's the IDEATE method. Identify, discover, enhance, anticipate, target, and evaluate.